This episode is brought to you by Audi. The road is calling. Embrace the thrill of the drive with the all-new, fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron. Featuring effortless power, serious acceleration, and advanced Audi tech. It's not just a new EV. It's a new way to experience driving. The all-new, fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron is here. The next chapter of Audi starts now.
Hello and welcome to Fintech Insider Insights. I'm David Barton-Grimley, Fintech Strategy Director right here at 11FS. Whether it's in meetings with clients, at one of our events, or on this very podcast, it does sometimes feel like AI is all anyone ever wants to talk about, let's face it. So where are we at with AI in the financial services industry today? And is financial services where all the interesting AI stuff is even happening? Well, on today's episode, we are going to find out. Now, I'm going to preface this conversation by saying it will mostly be centered around generative AI, which is a subset of AI that focuses on creating new content, such as text, images, or music, by learning patterns from existing data and generating original outputs. I'm going to make an assumption that a lot of our listeners kind of know what generative AI is. I certainly hope you do. Unlike traditional AI, which analyzes or classifies data, generative AI actively produces novel material based on learned patterns. And by the way, we got that definition from ChatGPT. As ever, I'm not alone. And this week, I'm joined by a great panel of AI experts to look at how generative AI is making its mark on the world before discussing how banks and fintechs can walk the AI tightrope, and it is quite the tightrope, to provide intelligent, truly digital financial services to their customers. So on that note, first up, we have a return to the podcast for Aditi Subbarao, Global Financial Services Industry Lead at Instabase. Welcome back to the show, Aditi. How are things?
Never a dull moment in the world of AI, is there, David? But thank you for having me back. It's really exciting to join you guys always. We've been spending a lot of time working across financial services institutions on new applications of generative AI across the automation, analysis, and search spaces. So lots to talk about.
Ooh, very interesting. And next up, it's a Fintech Insider debut for Colin Payne, Head of Innovation at the FCA. Thanks for joining us, Colin. You are someone I know very well, but for our listeners, please tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at the FCA.
Great to be here, David. Thank you for inviting me. I'm Head of Innovation at the FCA, and I'm a relatively newcomer to the FCA, been there a couple of months, looking after some of the most exciting work the FCA does. And specifically in AI, we're focused on AI lab work this year, and it's really exciting to share some of that work with you.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us. And last but not least, it's another Fintech Insider debut. Joining us, we have Fernanda Dobal, Product Director of AI and Chat at Cleo. Welcome, Fernanda. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and Cleo.
Thanks. It's great to be here. So my background is in innovation design and digital consumer products. I've spent the last 10 years working in mission-driven organizations across education, health, and more recently, financial services. I've been developing AI assistants for a few years, and I'm currently product director at Cleo, which is on a mission to change the world's relationship with money. So we've built the world's first AI financial assistant, and I'm excited to tell you more about that as we go through.
Awesome. All right, so we have our panel. So to kick off the show, let's dive into where we're at with generative AI more broadly and how it's making its mark on the world. That's going to be the first part of this podcast. But first, I'd like us maybe to sort of take a step back and reflect on where AI has been, because I think it's changed quite a lot, right? Like generative AI is not really where we've come from. So what are our panel's memories of kind of early successful implementations? Where did this all start? Colin, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, I think go to the oldest person on the table.
Sorry for being ageist.
No, it's fine. I did code when I was young, so my first jobs were coding in BASIC and creating some of the first algorithmic, I suppose, deterministic AI algorithms, and that was for trading in merchant banking. So I mean, I think financial services has used it for an awfully long time, as naturally to adopt this kind of technology to find ways of beating the market in that case, but also dealing with huge amounts of data. So it was a natural place to begin, and I'm very comfortable with that. I think obviously going from deterministic to probabilistic is a massive change, and I remember using it for the first time as a attendee in an FCA hack back in, 2 years ago, back a couple of years ago. And it was brand new then, so really early days. But clearly it's been adopted very quickly since then.
Yeah, and it's gotten better a lot since then. Fernanda, Aditi?
I'm going to jump in there and make Colin feel a little less bad, because my first memories of AI are actually, again, from 25 years ago, when, as an engineering student with a group of my classmates, we tried to build a voice-actuated telephone dialer, which was a novelty at that time, sitting on the floor of the library. And we actually had to change the language that we were using for the numbers from English to Marathi, an Indian language, which was much easier to recognize, right? So that's kind of where it started. And then I think, to echo what Colin said, especially in the financial services domain, we've been using it for years and years. And I almost think of it as a little bit of a circular journey, because if you look at the first few applications, these were around things like credit scoring. FICO had used it for that, or Goldman Sachs or Citibank were using it to predict market movements and scenario analysis to effectively take investment-related decisions. So it very much started in the world of data processing, data analysis, and manipulation. As we moved from the old machine learning world into more of deep learning and now into GenAI, it has gone from that data processing world more into conversations, consumer interactions, customer experience. But we are now taking it further into the data world again, where we're trying to take automatic decisions and agents and things like that. And the path that it has followed is data, customer, back to data. But the change here, I think, which has happened is from dealing with structured data, which is kind of the examples that Colin gave. It was market data, it was buy and sell prices, it was opens and closes and so on, to more unstructured data now. And I think that is where the historical evolution will start going from data which is easy to manipulate into data which is much harder to manipulate. But yeah, I do admit the pace of change has been phenomenal, almost too much to keep pace with.
Oh, so fast. Fernanda, how about you?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely exponential. And I think really interesting what you're saying about the cycle. And I think the way we think about evaluating success has changed over time, right? Like, how are you evaluating success with some of these newer models, and thinking about those feedback loops is something that's also changing. And I think the other thing that's changing, like, on the consumer side, is this user experience paradigm shift of, it didn't used to be so mainstream to talk about AI. And I love that we started with definitions, because when a lot of people today think about AI, they jump straight to generative. But actually the way we interact with these technologies is changing dramatically.
Yeah, absolutely. Mine is Microsoft Tay, for any of you who remember Microsoft Tay back in 2016, when these kind of NLP, LLMs were just sort of becoming very new and novel. And, I think it lasted 24 hours before they had to take it down because it just started spouting all sorts of racist stuff. And how the technology has evolved since then. And that kind of leads us to the next part, I think, of what we're going to talk about. Because unless you've been under a rock, literally under a rock for the last month, you would know just how fast the news has been breaking, right? So, we've had 2 to 3 years of GenAI from OpenAI, and in the last month or so, we've had, DeepSeek. We've had the market crash. We've had OpenAI respond to that with another model. We've had all sorts of changes from, closed ecosystems. I think Sam Altman came out recently and said, actually, you know what, like maybe the future is open and we might be on the wrong side of history. I suppose what I'm saying is that having watched this over the last month or so, it really does give you pause to show that there is a way forward to adopt GenAI in financial services. And that leads me into the question for the panel is how far away do we all think we are from mainstream adoption in financial services? How far away do we think we are from banks and financial institutions actually using this thing for core processes, not just for experimentation or customer experiences or whatnot, but actually changing the way that they operate? What does everyone think?
I can start there. And I think this is because for the last 2 or 3 years, I've been basically having this conversation. Like, what are the use cases you're using it for? How much of it is proof of concept, proof of value? Like, how much of it is experimentation and exploration? Whereas how much of it is involved in a business critical process? And I think that change has definitely started happening. So almost until I'd say mid last year, mid 2024, we were still very much in the peripheral use case territory, where generative AI specifically was being used more for marketing and communication use cases, or research, or summarization of publicly available information, and so on. It is now gradually getting into the domain of core banking processes or core business processes, like underwriting decisioning, like customer onboarding, and multiple other use cases, which are far more central to the business of a financial institution. I expect that to keep growing. So if you look at, again, there's a study from McKinsey which says that in terms of AI adoption, they saw a jump from 55% of survey respondents in 2023 saying they had at least one AI use case, and not GenAI, one AI use case in 2023, which went to 72 in 2024, and GenAI, 33% usage to 65%, over the last year. Now, the interesting thing here, and this is the block that we will have to overcome for it to become truly mainstream. Adoption, in my mind, is a function of business impact, which in itself is a function of data access. What has been holding banks, especially, or any regulated financial institution from completely adopting generative AI as mainstream is concerns around data privacy, data security, sharing PII, and so on. As the guardrails, as the security measures come in place to do that, more and more data can be opened up for processing with GenAI, which means they will be able to create more tangible and quantifiable business impact, which means the adoption will increase. And I think that is the step that we are now in the process of unlocking, as opposed to having unlocked completely.
Awesome. Fernanda, I mean, your perspective in Cleo should be really, really interesting with AI right at the heart of what you guys are doing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think it's different from incumbents to someone like us, right? A startup, now a scale-up that's come in and been AI native from day one and jumped on the generative bandwagon quite early on, and how we think about, the foundational technology. I think it's interesting to separate adoption as a work tool for the workforce and how we increase and improve our own processes and our efficiency as a business for our employees, that training in-house, and then how we use it for our products that are customer-facing, that are business-facing, and obviously having to balance both of those across the business. But yeah, I think it's, for us, it's, from day one, it's something that's always been top of mind, and we've been riding that at Cleo.
And I think from our point of view, we've obviously adopted some of these technologies ourselves. So there's plenty of use cases that we're applying them with. But the most interesting area for me is getting to a point where we can give the right guidance to firms who are exploring uses of these technologies in frontline, because I think back office is pretty ubiquitous now.
Mm-hmm.
I think most of our companies, certainly in the UK, utilize GenAI to look after some of those administrative tasks, as you said earlier. But interesting, when you touch the front line, you touch the customer, and certainly looking at the advice boundaries, those kind of areas, which I'm sure is important to Cleo and others. We need to be very clear on how far we feel comfortable with that going. Mm-hmm. And the way we do it is to work with the industry, and we would prefer to be having in-depth experimental activity with users, and seeing how that barrier to pushing the technology out into completely ubiquitous use, so it's really competitive and a competitive advantage for the UK. That's where we're trying to help push those boundaries where we can.
It's fascinating. And I suppose what all of you are saying to some extent is that we're moving from LLMs and GenAI being able to do sort of single things to being able to do multiple things and, stitch together, whether it's back-end processes, front-end processes. I'd like to ask everybody about Agentic AI and agents, because I think this is where it's coming to. I think, Aditi, you mentioned something like this as well. There is definitely lots of talk online about this idea that, very, very quickly, in fact, you could have agents talking to agents and agents executing commands that work with agents. And I'm sure that creates a bit of a nightmare from a regulatory perspective, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But it'd be good to get the panel's point of view as to, how real do you all think this actually is?
I'm happy to start there. I think it's really important to take the customer-centric approach and how people are interacting with these tools, right? What we are ready for as a society and what people want from us. I think one really interesting insight that's come out of our work is there's some trust building happening with AI as a sector. We see trust growing among population as people experiment with these tools, but also we see advantages. So, one maybe counterintuitive example is that sometimes people feel more open talking to a chatbot than they do to a real human because they don't feel judged. And so we see something, your financial reality is super taboo. It may be something you're not comfortable sharing with your friends and family. And so you can talk to Cleo, she can roast you, she can hype you up, make you feel better about what you're going through. And there's something really valuable about that interaction, that relationship, that trust, that we see people feeling better. And I expect that to grow over time. And so to get to the agentic point, I think there's a lot of value even before these tools start executing things on your behalf. And then for us, the main question is, how do we keep the human in the loop, right? I think for the foreseeable, we still expect to have approval from our users and have that much be a two-way conversation before executing anything specific.
Can I just add one remark there? While you were describing that, Fernanda, I love the fact that you said, Cleo, she can help you do this and she can help you do that. And that's one of my, something I love about AI and especially AI chatbots and agents, which is that while we all bemoan the lack of women in the field of AI, a disproportionately large number of AI chatbots and agents actually are female.
Yes.
So there's Erica, there's Cleo, there's Debbie. There's most banks will have a female name associated with their chatbots. And I think that's incredible. We need more of that. But okay, so that apart, I think I see AI agents as a very natural evolution of why we are developing AI and also an inevitable next step of where it is going. And what I mean by that is the whole drive for developing AI technologies, especially in the enterprise and then how it relates to consumers, is for greater efficiency and greater usability of data for good. So whether that's better managing risk, better generating returns, better developing financial health, education, whatever it might be. Now, until now, it's almost as though we were interacting with AI or computers at large as though they were, say, I don't know, a 6 or 7-year-old child. I keep falling into the trap of childcare as analogies for all technology, but bear with me. You have to give it explicit instructions and say, we are going to the park, wear your jacket, wear your shoes. Once you wear your shoes, tie your shoelaces, because otherwise they're quite capable of walking out without having done that because you didn't give the instructions, right? That's how it started. We are now dealing with what I call perhaps a teenager. So they're about 13 or 14. They kind of figure out that if you've told them to wear their shoes, they have to tie their shoelaces because they've done it multiple times. They've spent the last 8 years putting their shoes on by themselves. They sort of get a little bit, but they still don't know what is absolutely right and what is absolutely wrong. They're quite capable of being brave or reckless and trying to run through a red light because they believe they can do it, right? They don't have inherent guardrails. And similarly, AI doesn't have an inherent moral compass, which we still need to keep giving it and keep doing it. We will soon reach a stage where these agents will turn into adults. They'll have done enough, learned enough, and develop their own ways of learning to become more and more independent. The great thing there is that they will be more independent. So you will have to do a lot less to look after them and keep them alive and bring them up and make them help you. But at the same time, you don't really know what they'll end up doing. The other thing that will end up happening is their social circle will stop being people you know and children you invite for play dates for. They will go and make their own relationships. They will go and do things by themselves with other agents, and these entire systems of agents will develop, which we will need to find a way to regulate before we kind of let them out in the open. And I think that is the very fascinating development that's now happening in the agentic AI space, where all of these systems are now going to start getting interconnected. And it's a question of how do we keep the right level of control so that we still get the value and still get the autonomous output that we want without letting it become harmful.
Aditi, can I just say that is the best analogy I have ever heard about where we are right now. I love that, because that's kind of how it feels a little bit when you start programming these things, or if you go into Python and you start, it really does feel like you are speaking to someone who is able to understand just about enough about their universe to be able to deploy the things that you're asking for, but that require the kind of guardrails that you were mentioning. I think it's just a wonderful way of putting it. But Colin, I want to come to you on this because, as Aditi was saying, it's all about guardrails and regulations. But how do you think about the opportunities and also the risks that this poses as a regulator? What role should it play?
I mean, it's an interesting analogy. I mean, we're obviously looking after the stair guard. And maybe not for the teenagers, but I think it's a really, really useful thing connected to the agentic. We work with other regulators, first of all. So it's really interesting. We have really strong relationships across the board. DRCF is an agency which brings us together, the Digital Regulators Collaboration Forum. And we're actually looking at this from the lens of KYA, Know Your Agent. And thinking of practically, what are those guardrails that we put around normally knowing your customer? How does that extend when it becomes an agentic customer? Or if it does, I mean, we've got to obviously test these things. We've got to understand the risks, the opportunities, as you say. And I think for us as a regulator in the UK, we try to balance those out. I mean, being in a unique position, I guess we are, between where Europe has applied quite a strong control over the legislation, the regulation. And of course, on the other side of the pond, we've now loosened a lot of that control. We've seen that control go under the current president's rolling back of some of the 2023 considerations, and which were giving some safety guardrails. So we're interestingly observing both of these actions where one of our friendly jurisdictions next to us is putting huge guardrails on, potentially, although those guardrails, to be fair, apply to different layers of risk. So, of course, depending on where you are in that perspective, you may have more or less controls. And of course, over the other side of the pond with our other friends, they're looking at a different approach. The UK has always had this measured approach, which I think is really interesting for us as a market. It gives us balance. It's outcomes-based. It's a really measured balance between the risk and the opportunity. I mean, on our specifics this year, we're considering growth as a really important area of focus. Mm-hmm. So naturally, we look at risk. Of course we do. We have many streams of risk activity, but we also work with industry to make sure we can leverage every technology and optimize the opportunity. So it's really an interesting role for the regulator to play. Quite unusual, I think, as well. We've got a lot of spotlights on us at the moment because we play that role, and we're offering something perhaps in between the two extremes.
It's an exciting position for us to be in the UK. Thanks, Colin. And just on that note, we're going to take a short break here. In the next half, we'll look ahead to the future of AI in financial services, its potential impacts on employees, businesses, customers, and society. No small topic. Stay tuned. There's much more coming up.
Cybersecurity is the top concern for UK businesses, according to Vanta's recent State of Trust report. But whether you're a startup founder or an experienced security professional, Vanta is here to help. Businesses use Vanta to establish trust by automating compliance needs across over 35 frameworks like ISO 27001 and SOC 2, centralize security workflows, complete security questionnaires up to 5 times faster, and proactively manage vendor risk. Join over 9,000 global companies like Flow Health, Synthesia, and Alicabank, who use Vanta to manage risk and prove security in real time. For a limited time, get $1,000 off Vanta at vanta.com/insider. That's VANTA.com/insider for $1,000 off.
I was never really a runner. The way I see running is a gift, especially when you have stage 4 cancer. I'm Anne. I'm running the Boston Marathon, presented by Bank of America. I run for Dana-Farber Cancer Institute to give people like me a chance to thrive in life, even with cancer.
Join Bank of America in helping Anne's cause. Give if you can at BofA.com/supportAnne. What would you like the power to do? References to charitable organizations is not an endorsement by Bank of America Corporation. Copyright 2025.
Welcome back to Fintech Insider Insights, where we're diving into AI. In the first half of the show, we discussed how the impact of GenAI is having on the world so far. In the next half, we're going to talk about what the future might look like for financial services. So we've begun to sort of talk about things like Agentic AI and all of this kind of stuff. But I think one of the kind of big meta questions for us in the industry as we reflect on, fintechs and new businesses and incumbents, does a truly Gen AI native business model just look fundamentally different? Because I suppose one of the things that a lot of people are talking about right now is that there is almost a threat that any kind of business coming in that's Gen AI centric or Gen AI new, they're able to deploy faster, et cetera, et cetera. So is that real?
I'm going to say, obviously, we think so.
Yeah.
A predictable answer from me. But I think there is an advantage related to the technology. The technology is a tool, but the flexibility in general you have as a disruptor in terms of being very customer and commercial centric, right? How quickly you move to catch up with some of these changes that customers are asking for. How do you fit into their lives that are harder for some incumbents to catch up to? And so, at Cleo, as we see people's relationship with their finances evolving, we see some trends around financial literacy, the way people collect information on social media more than they used to, and how we incorporate and fit into their lives using generative AI as a tool to reach them in a tone of voice, in a platform that's very accessible and that is leveraging these needs we see in the market. That's where we see some of the big advantages.
I have a slightly nuanced response to that. So it's almost like, yes, GenAI is a very different business model if you do want to start natively. I think if we're looking at traditional technology, we're still very much following linear process flows or business workflows and trying to automate them. Again, analogy time, right? If you imagine a weaver's loom, you have the warp, which goes vertically down, and you have the weft, which goes horizontally with the shuttle to weave the cloth. As of now, in all of our talk around changing from like waterfall tech deployments to agile and whatever, all we've done is we've made that horizontal shuttle weave a lot faster, maybe do slightly more intricate patterns, maybe do slightly more complex stuff, but it is still following a step-by-step process. With GenAI, it's almost like we're printing the whole fabric, the whole textile in one swap, in one go. And what that means is you could potentially start from the bottom right corner. You could potentially go bottom right to top left and all the way back. So we are fundamentally rethinking the way business processes and data journeys work. So that is one. Who it will benefit, though, is an it depends kind of answer. And what I mean by that is I like to think of it in two ways. What is the core provision that you are giving your customers? Are you a provider of intelligence and information and offerings related to that information? Or are you a provider of goods and services? Are you actually going to give me a bank account? Are you going to make a payment? Are you going to hold my gold in a wallet? The answers are different for these two. If you are a provider of intelligence and information, GenAI is going to help you leapfrog incumbents and definitely make your business model a lot more high growth much quicker. If you are a provider of products and services, even if they might be financial products and services, your wealth is actually the customer base you have, the trust you've gotten from them, and the data that you have generated by having access to those customers. So in those cases, I still see incumbents or perhaps large established organizations still have a bit of a head start because they can then partner with or use GenAI native providers and technologies and people like Cleo to then get the intelligence and information that they need for their customers to access their products and services better. So there is a bit of an it depends in my head to that question.
Yeah.
And I think that we've got many models actually that we can refer back to. Fintech was the obvious one that I would look at. When fintech came, it disrupted. It was the fintech business models were entirely capable of shaking the foundation of the incumbents world and providing customers with an amazing service swiftly, pivoting, agility, all those kind of great things. And they didn't have that kind of baggage of complex back office systems, legacy technologies that they had to deal with. So that was an amazing opportunity for the fintechs we know and love. Similar here. I mean, this is a great opportunity to step into a place which is serving the customer in a better way. But I guess I would just note the caution that still the old-fashioned deterministic and predictable model sets have a place. And I would say, as you know, from a regulatory point of view, the thing we would find difficult, I would say, is the black box advisory. Any area where we couldn't understand why a particular action has taken place needs to be considered very carefully. And so there, again, I'm going to be the balanced regulator here, but there's a place for both of those. And I personally would say a hybrid model between something deterministic and really quite predictable and clear and based on strong, solid clarity data, versus something a little bit more spicy when we come to GenAI and using some more probability. Those two together are an incredibly strong combination.
Yeah, it's the industry working together, isn't it? And I think you're right, because that is kind of the way fintech sort of works anyway. I mean, you know, when fintech first came around as a term, there was very much this sense that it would be a threat, that it would come in and destroy the incumbents.
That's right.
And actually, it's the partnership between the two that really makes it work. Maybe you can even make the argument that it pushes the case for trust even more. I mean, I was reading this thing on LinkedIn about a model for psychotherapy where, you know, people are trusting the responses that come back from the model more than the psychotherapist. I'm sure like a lot of our listeners have heard of this. But actually the downside of that is the privacy, and the black box issues that you're raising, Colin, have not been really resolved yet. And
No.
I might find a more empathetic result from a system that is trained on billions of data points on how to be extremely empathetic. But am I going to trust it with my data? Am I going to trust it? And so the more we use these things, the more it raises these concerns.
Yeah, you're going to trust it with your money.
Yes.
Because I think there's that wonderful dichotomy. Wouldn't we love to have a personal 24/7, highly qualified financial advisor specifically trained on our lives and our needs? Off they go. They do the job for us. But what happens when it goes wrong? Because inevitably there will be instances of that. And whether you compare that as an analogy to self-driving cars and accidents, I don't know. There's going to be an analogy where someone gets involved, and usually, you know, we have to predict that kind of thing before it happens. Of course, that's our role.
Yeah,
I'd love to respond to that. I think there's something really interesting there about the right tool for the job, right? Whereas you mentioned traditional machine learning versus Gen AI, the pros and cons, evaluation. How do you determine success for each model? How do you start to look at human in the loop evaluation and versus more programmatic, right? You have LLMs judging LLMs, and then you've got two layers of decision making you have to parse through. And that's really going to be a lot of the game-changing work is how you define success for all of these.
Yeah, absolutely right.
Yeah, absolutely.
On that success point, I love always going back to the driver for the change. And again, I think these days, especially with DeepSeek and all of the recent activity, we've all gotten too caught up in the performance of the model. And it's about my LLM is performing better, and Grok is actually beating Claude, and it's beating like Llama. And at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. What matters is the outcome that you're generating for your customers. And it is always good to keep reminding ourselves of that, because there are developments happening at such a fast pace and news articles and headlines coming out so much that we tend to get caught up in the wrong metrics and the wrong numbers. And therefore, I was thinking about it ahead of today's conversation, and I would like to patent a new ratio for the measurement of generative AI application success.
Love
And
it.
in my head, the way I define it is this ratio is called CO upon TE. And what that means is the quality of customer outcome divided by the time and effort it takes an employee or a performer of those actions
Yes.
to do it. The better quality of customer outcomes, and everything else wraps into customer outcomes, right? You're speeding up cycle time, you're taking better decisions, you're managing your risk better, all of those things. Or maybe it's safer. Maybe you are including more people in that provision than you would have before. So you get inclusion, you get consumer duty compliance, all of that gets wrapped up in that numerator, which is customer outcome. And then the denominator is the time and effort. Am I hiring more people? Am I actually using hundreds of people in a back office in some emerging market country? Like, all of that comes into the bottom. And then technology is just that factor. It doesn't matter what technology you use. Are you having to maintain 7 different systems? Are you consolidating it in one model? Are you using agents? Are you using deterministic models? It's all irrelevant. Ultimately, how can we minimize the denominator, increase the numerator, and then do good for the society? And I think that's the only metric we should all be focused on, without worrying about all of these like tech nuances around this.
I love that so much, because we're doing a version of that at Cleo. So being able to measure based on customer job to be done is what we call it. Like, did someone achieve what they were looking for when they came to us? And that's absolutely the direction we need to be measuring success in.
I thought I could actually patent that, but you beat me to it, Fernanda.
I think it's a great angle as well for RegTech as well, because we haven't really spoken much about RegTech, but obviously we advocate for positive RegTech solutions that could help, and those kind of equations, if you like, those kind of focuses on outcome, both beneficial and securing the needs of the customer, can be very, very well monitored through great RegTech, and I think it's a brilliant idea. You should definitely talk to our data scientists and maybe noodle over some statistics on it and see if it does work.
Or do a startup as well. Aditi, your very simple formula is actually raising where we're going next on the podcast, is because what happens when that ratio tips? What happens when the ratio tips to the customer success, the outcome is better justified through agentic AI than it is through hiring people? And of course, this is the big kind of societal jobs. Am I gonna have a job? And when we were looking at this like a year or 2 years ago, a lot of the kind of first wave, shall we say, was around things like copywriters, content writers. You were seeing a lot of redundancies of people who were writing web copy, for example. When you spoke to a web developer, I've got lots of friends who are developers of all sorts of different things. I would just ask them, is this going to come for your job? And they would go, no, just miles away from doing that. You ask those people the same question today, and they have a different answer. And it's partially due to the speed, really, that we've seen. There's a great stat. The WF found that 25% of businesses believe that AI will create job losses, and that is pretty substantial. Where is the panel on this? I mean, how real is this as a threat? Who'd like to go first?
I think it's definitely changed in 2 years. I think people are starting to talk about digital workforce with some kind of, I suppose, some kind of force of policy, some kind of strategic direction. Look at Klarna. As an example,
Yes.
Very, very bullish on the replacement of staff with AI, and I think it's something in all of our minds, because we see I think all of us around the table, we use it every day.
Yeah.
We see the performance of it every day. I'll feed something in, and I'm genuinely stunned most of the time by what comes out of it in terms of speed, quality, the lack of hallucination, especially some of the deep research models. I haven't tried Grok 3 yet. I'm looking forward to trying that tonight. These models are becoming exceptionally sophisticated and capable. And I would say, for most of us who are in jobs that require us to think, we would use them to research, to summarize, all those kind of good things, but now create content as well. And yes, have some oversight in that. But I wonder about the industries where traditionally they've had great pyramids of, the business model is a pyramid, like consulting firms generally. It's a huge amount of jobs underneath the partner, for example. How is that going to shift in the future? I don't know, but I think people are definitely looking at it and looking at those models.
So I think what we are seeing happening, and there are a number of different surveys and number of different studies on it, which say that X percentage of jobs expected to be lost, X percentage of jobs expected to be created. So there are arguments to both sides of the puzzle. Like somebody ran a poll in our university alumni WhatsApp group, which said that how many of you work in an industry which existed 25 years ago, and how many of you are doing a job which existed 25 years ago? You will be surprised at how few people said yes, and especially to both of those. So there are definitely jobs being created just as they are being lost. The problem is that the losses and the gains are not fungible. The jobs which are being lost are those which are exactly like Colin mentioned. It's the back office, it's the operational, it's the repetitive manual work which is being automated and taken over by AI. The jobs which are being created are very much the creative, problem-solving, more intellectual sort of jobs. Bridging that divide is, I think, the biggest challenge of our times at the moment. How do we get thousands of people who, exactly like you mentioned, Colin, who are working in BPO centers and outsource centers of these consulting agencies to stop what they have been doing for years together and do something entirely different, to think entirely differently? However, I can't help but teach myself to look at it positively, which is that huge societal shocks, almost crises, have led to the change in the nature of the workforce. So if you look at pre-Second World War and post-Second World War, the number of women in the workforce changed dramatically because there was no option but to increase those people who were doing the jobs that the men weren't there to do anymore. And you suddenly had more women doing those jobs. Again, like back to that example, you had telephone operators who were sitting and plugging wires from one place to the other because telephones were being used. So I hope that the very threat of AI, which is creating this massive shift, will help us create those roles and do the upskilling which is required for those roles to make people take that shift. And what I mean by that is education and technological skills for people who are in geographies, which are not easy to access for that kind of education, or speaking languages, which might not be easy to learn traditional methods of learning with, will now be accessible with AI. And I think that is what we need to take this AI to do. Like create a new workforce which perhaps might not have access to opportunities which are now being created, and upskill them to do it.
It's really interesting you brought up the World War II example, actually, because something I'm very passionate about is how women are using AI, and we see it on both sides. Women are more at risk of being in jobs that are likely to be disrupted, and they're upskilling less. We saw a recent study where 71% of men age 18 to 24 were using generative AI weekly, and only 59% of women. And there are many theories as to why this is. Maybe women don't have as much time because we know they take a disproportionate amount of unpaid labor in the household. Maybe they're less forgiving because they tried the technology early on, saw an early hallucination, and disregarded it. But I think as we think about strategies for that upskilling and how to combat this, it's really important that we think about these training programs specifically along these gendered lines, and even if we think about the data that a lot of this is trained on from the internet is inherently biased, and that's something to take into account as well.
I was going to add, there's just one, I suppose the black swan event that maybe we haven't covered is the fact that we are moving towards AGI, artificial general intelligence. I think all data points to that being within a year or two, which then presents a different problem for us. And I know in the past we've replaced jobs with other jobs. When you have a situation where there's wholesale capability of machines to outperform all human function, creative, intellectual, or manual, it's a very different world at that point. And then if you then consider the next 3 years after that, the more rapid introduction of quantum into the picture, humanity has never had this amount of technology innovation in such a short space of time with such profound impacts. So I think we have to be mindful of the future and how we embrace this, because I think it's got great opportunity, but also it's moving very, very fast. So I mean, that's what we're looking at. We're looking at the roadmap ahead, the Horizon 2 and the Horizon 3, which is extremely interesting to look ahead to.
Yeah, it's terrifying, and I suppose that's where guardrails come in, right?
They have to be there.
Yeah, we can only look to sci-fi and, various different films that have come over the course of the last 30 years and books which show what can happen in that dystopian world. And it sounds like we're doing all of the right things to make sure that those guardrails are in place. The Second World War reference is brilliant, right? Because the other thing that leads to, that you've all been mentioning, is industrial policy, right? That's where we have the ability as a society to make the right investments to reskill, upskill, train, do whatever we need to do to be in the right kind of competitive world. So as we start to wrap up, I'm sure our listeners are curious. With AI evolving so rapidly, how are we all going to stay ahead of the curve? What are the kind of things we look to? Colin, I'm going to start with you. I know that you are involved in quite a few things with your role. I mean, what are some of the things that people should be reading or looking at?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, regulation has a pivotal role to play to allow innovation to happen safely. That's the bottom line. The UK, it's outcomes focused, it's principles based regulatory control. So it covers all of what we've talked about. It focuses on the outcomes for industry, for the consumer, and for a healthy economy. So we are putting in place the right environmental aid for that innovation to take place, and it's critical. We have a launched AI lab this year, which has been extremely successful. We had over 400 experts join us at the FCA headquarters. I think it's one of the first of its type in the world. It places the UK firmly at the centre of creating those correct guardrails. As I said before, we're in the middle of two potential options, and perhaps we can offer a really clear middle road. But then it's about working with the sector, and all of us have a conversation around this table. We know that we're a regulator that will step into that. Mm-hmm. We will provide the right kind of environments. We've got sandboxes, we've got regulatory guidance, we've got all the things that we're known for as a gold standard regulator, but we're stepping in to do more. We're stepping into that, as I said, that Horizon 2. So we're going to provide a supercharged sandbox launching in the summer. It's an environment that allows us to experiment with AI and really test those guardrails so that they're suitable to protect, but also encourage all the innovation that Cleo and others do brilliantly. We want to be with you for that journey. And then we want to learn from you. We want to bring that feedback back to policy, and provide the right guidance, because for us, UK isn't going to additionally regulate around AI for financial services, but it does need, and it has to, clarify and help industry develop. And for us, working with you and working with industry is the way to get that real feedback loop working and give the industry what it needs.
Oh, it's exciting. Aditi, Fernanda?
So I have 3 suggestions. So the first is, I use AI a lot to learn about AI. And what I mean by that is tools like Perplexity or ChatGPT. Ask it a question and let it tell you what you should be reading. So if you want to create yourself a course for a week, do that. If you want a 30-minute preparation for a client meeting, do that. I also use Instabase AI Hub. So here's a plug for what we do. Please go try it. Just upload any document or like a 100-page research report that you want a short summary onto Instabase's AI Hub, and it'll do your work for you. And then the third piece of it is use LinkedIn. I love reading people's posts on LinkedIn. And based on what they're seeing, you then find out whom you should follow, which newsletters you should subscribe to. And it's almost like they have already done the filtration exercise for you to highlight what is relevant to your curiosity and your work. And you can just keep following that as a much more efficient way than doing it all yourself. So those would be my 3 suggestions.
Yeah, I'll echo what has been said around experiment with the models, learn the differences between them. Echoing back to your analogy, I often ask GPT to explain things to me like I'm 5, like I'm 15, and like I have a PhD, and try to bridge the differences between those. And then there's a little newsletter out of the US called The Neuron that I like. They use a lot of cat GIFs, but they make AI super accessible and have the breaking news that's happening each day.
Nothing wrong with cat GIFs.
They are the internet.
It's the future.
You could argue. Yeah, and also Aditi and Fernanda, all of you, to your point about actually using AI, a couple of tools I just chuck in there: Cursor, Replete. The more you use these things and the more you experiment with some of the newer models that are coming out, the more you really do take pause, I think.
I think it's like having a superpower.
It is.
And I remember, just a little anecdote, I first came across the work of the FCA a couple of years ago. I came into them, I used my first AI, GPT style for stuff. And it was revolutionary for them. They actually were in conversation with my team now. They thought I'd brought in an actor. I'd created this video chatbot to help with the regulation. And they were convinced I'd overnight, on the hack, I'd found an actor, got him to do the voiceover and created it. But it was actually a basic video AI, which I'd been using in Dubai, and I'd used the same technology. But that's how fast it's moving. Now we're kind of there. We're in the future now, which is really interesting.
Amazing. And on that note, thank you, all of you, so much. This has been such an excellent conversation. That wraps up today's discussion. So where can people find out about all of you? Aditi, let's start with you.
Absolutely. So please find me on LinkedIn. And like I said, look up www.instabase.com to get access to AI Hub.
Awesome. And Fernanda?
Yep. You can also find me on LinkedIn and on X.
And Colin?
Well, obviously LinkedIn is the unifying factor nowadays. Mm-hmm. You'll find me there. But also, if you want to contact the FCA, you can drop me an email, colin.payne@fca.org.uk, and I'd be happy to help out whatever you need.
Amazing. And you can find me, surprise, surprise, on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening. If you like what you've heard, follow our podcast and don't forget to leave us a review. It helps us to make it better and helps others find the show. As always, if you want to join the conversation, find us on social media. Just search for 11FS or Fintech Insider, or email podcasts@11fs.com. Thanks very much and goodbye.
Cybersecurity is the top concern for UK businesses, according to Vanta's recent State of Trust report. But whether you're a startup founder or an experienced security professional, Vanta is here to help. Businesses use Vanta to establish trust by automating compliance needs across over 35 frameworks like ISO 27001 and SOC 2, centralize security workflows, complete security questionnaires up to 5 times faster, and proactively manage vendor risk. Join over 9,000 global companies like Flow Health, Synthesia, and Alica Bank, who use Vanta to manage risk and prove security in real time. For a limited time, get $1,000 off Vanta at vanta.com/insider. That's VANTA.com/insider for $1,000 off.